Welcome to Hard Talk. I'm Stephen Sackur. The Israeli Defense Force sees itself as an institution which binds the nation together. Most young Israelis serve in its ranks after leaving school. It claims to combine defense of the state with a sense of moral purpose. My guest today served in the IDF. But he sees an institution in denial, corroded and corrupted by the military occupation of Palestinian communities over a 50-year span. Avner, Gvariahu and like-minded soldiers turned dissidents say they are breaking the silence. Are they patriots or traitors? Avner Gvariahu, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you.
I think it's fair to say the IDF is probably the most sacrosanct institution in all of Israel. Was it hard for you to cross a line, to break the taboo and speak out against what the IDF is doing?
You know, breaking the silence, I think, in any context isn't easy. Definitely in the Israeli society. It's not a natural thing in that sense to break that kind of silence. But I think that myself, like over 1,000 soldiers that are part of breaking the silence, former soldiers, it was much more difficult for me to keep my silence than to break it. And it's true that there are prices, but the truth of the matter is that I care too much for my country and my society to keep silent. And although there are pushbacks, we will persevere.
You broke the silence after you'd put your uniform away and left the IDF. Were you silent while you were a serving soldier?
Well, I didn't feel that I was silent. I remember occasions where I brought up what I was doing in the nights in Nablus and Jenin. When I was back home, I thought that I was in silence when I asked my soldiers what they thought about these operations. But it actually took me a while after my service, where I actually thought that I could put my military service behind me, to realize that I myself was also silent, that I myself was also not really frank when I was looking myself in the mirror.
So you were, to use that phrase, a good soldier. You followed orders and you did things which, and I'm now asking rather than stating, I'm guessing you did things which your moral conscience told you should not be doing, but you did them anyway and did not speak out against them.
That's true. I mean, I was a sergeant of a snipers team, and one of the routine missions that we carried out in Nablus, in Jenin, or in the surrounding areas of those two cities was a mission that we called a Straw Widow. Straw Widow, when you take over a Palestinian home, every house in the West Bank actually has a number. Each and every house has a number. So we would open up the maps and look at the specific house that looked into the right place that we had to enter, a city center or a road. And after we would verify that the house has the best parameters, windows, and geographical area, we made sure the people in the house were innocent. So we would enter a house of an innocent Palestinian home in the middle of the night. The first missions that I carried out, the adrenaline was pumping. The second, the third, the fourth, when it started to calm down, I realized I was sitting in someone's living room, bedroom, children's room. That was when it started to break.
And you are dealing with people in fear.
Constant fear, but I have to say the fear is two-sided. I was also full of fear. But I would say that what motivated me eventually to break my silence was the piercing eyes of young Palestinians when I was barging into their house in the middle of the night. I could always justify it to myself, but those eyes, the anger, their fear, was what eventually helped me overcome that. A house of a physician in Nablus, for example, that I entered in the middle of the night, taking him, his wife, and his daughter, and pushing them in a room. If they wanted to use their bathroom or their kitchen or use their phone, they need permission from me. That specific house in Nablus stayed with me for a while because that physician himself was kind enough and generous enough to sit down and explain to me what it means to be a Palestinian. And that experience, when I was sitting there in a house in Nablus, made me realize what I'm actually doing as a soldier to millions and millions of people. Me, myself, not someone else, not a different unit, Avner. And I thought that I was a good moral soldier, but I was actually helping entrench the occupation in that sense.
I just want to be clear. Are you saying that the very act of going into the house of an innocent Palestinian family to you was and is totally unacceptable and corrosive and doing serious damage to the sort of moral values of Israel's army and indeed the nation state? Or are you saying that that's just the tip of an iceberg of behavior, much of which is much worse than that?
Yeah, I would say that when you look at the past 50 years, entering the 51st year, you look at the past 13 years that we've been collecting testimonies from soldiers, then you have different kinds of testimonies. So like the straw widow that I just talked about, I could talk about the flying checkpoint or entering houses for searching or checkpoints or making our presence felt, instilling fear into the Palestinian population, or the actual orders were instilling the sense that they're being chased, showing there's a new sheriff in town. There's a constant system.
It's the imposition of a basic power dynamic, the message being we're in control, we're in charge of you and your lives, and we, in essence, can do what we want.
That's true, and I would say that in that you have mundane routine operations of just having standing in a checkpoint or walking through a city center or a village, and you can have cases in this military occupation of violence, of destruction of property, of humiliations of Palestinians. We've collected dozens of these testimonies. That's not the problem of the occupation, it's a symptom. The problem is the idea of controlling millions of people by force indefinitely, and that's where the state of Israel is going. That's where the government is actually taking us, an indefinite military occupation.
But this, in the end, what you're outlining as your critique of what is happening in Israel and that the IDF as the agent of occupation is doing, is essentially political. I mean, you're saying, if I understand you correctly, that the very act and policy of occupation is corroding Israel's value and must end. But the truth is, time after time after time, the Israeli public votes in elections for parties which sustain and believe in that occupation.
I mean, that's true, but when you look at this democracy, it's basically a democracy that is controlling and ruling millions of people that don't have a right or a say in that democracy. So between the river and the sea, you have about 13 million people, where half of them do not go and elect anyone. So a big part of our mission, and that's where we spend, as Breaking the Silence, the vast majority of our energy and our time, is speaking to our fellow citizens all across Israel. We're actually the leading organization in the anti-occupation camp in the sheer numbers of people that we meet. But we also recognize that the houses that we entered were not houses of Israelis. And the occupation is not an internal Israeli issue. It's an issue that affects millions of Palestinians, and obviously the international community is involved as well.
Yeah, and I want to come back to the politics of this in some detail, but just to stick for now with testimony, because Breaking the Silence is all about gathering together the voices of soldiers, former soldiers, who are no longer prepared to be silent about what they've seen. I just want you to be very clear with me about some of the other behaviors, because you've talked about the day-to-day dull routines of occupation, but the other behaviors, like, for example, testimony about looting, stealing, Israeli soldiers stealing from inside Palestinian family homes. Other testimony about deliberate acts of violence, striking youths, striking people in their own homes, beating them. Also firing rubber bullets, transgressing the limits that are supposed to be imposed on the firing of those bullets and undoing the packaging so they do more damage. All of these aren't just about the routines of occupation. They suggest to me an army that has within it significant numbers of soldiers who want to do bad things.
I mean, you can choose to look at it like that. I think it's more complex.
But isn't it important to be honest that there are Israeli soldiers, if this testimony is true, many say it's not, but if it's true, there are people in the IDF doing very bad things.
I mean, yeah, I could say more than that. I was one of those soldiers doing very bad things. I saw it with my own eyes. I was part of it. I was violent. And I think in that sense, it's not about pinpointing a specific soldier individual. And I don't think that there are Israeli generals waking up in the morning saying, how can I make the lives of Palestinians miserable? But there is a system that for now 51 years is constantly thinking, how can we maintain the status quo? Or I would say, let's take it a step further, how can we entrench it? The Israeli occupation, I think, has built in the mindset of the Israeli society a false equation that basically says it's a zero-sum game. It's either us or them. And in order for us to feel secure, they have to feel insecure. And when you have an entire army, or a vast majority of the Israeli army, which is in charge of maintaining that military control. So the mission is control. The symptom is exactly what you talked about. Now, those symptoms will not disappear until we end occupation. But the problem is not only how you act once you enter a house. That's exactly why I mentioned a straw widow. Because for me, the issue is the fact that you can enter any house. It's not how you smile or treat a Palestinian at a checkpoint, but the fact that you can control the lives of millions and control these checkpoints and pass permits.
Can you afford the luxury of this delicate conscience of yours when there is, whatever you say, there is a struggle which involves violence on both sides between Israel and the Palestinians?
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, I'm not a pacifist. And I was shot at. Friends of mine were injured. Soldiers of mine were injured. Good friends of mine were killed as well. It's not about being naive. It's about looking forward and understanding from our personal experience that in every house, in every checkpoint, in every land grab, in every unauthorized settlement that was just approved, for example, by our Minister of Defense just recently, we are dooming us and our neighboring Palestinians who are not going anywhere to another cycle of this. And in that sense, I'll just say one thing. I think that there is a very important distinction between a long-lasting conflict. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict definitely has two sides to it and a lot of bad blood. But in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, there's one issue, the Israeli occupation, that is one-sided. And it's our responsibility in that sense to want to end it and to end it.
But the point is, you're politicizing the IDF. You're quite plain that you believe as a political objective the occupation must be ended. And yet, day to day, the IDF has to be peopled by soldiers who are not political, but who loyally follow the orders of their commanders. And the Chief of Staff, Gadi Eisenkot, said back in May 2016, he said, the IDF soldiers must know beyond a shadow of doubt that the whole nation supports them and stands behind them, even when there are differences of political opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not here to criticize the IDF.
Well, that's exactly what you do.
No, so I'll tell you why I don't think that's what I do. What I do is I criticize the mission the IDF got to carry out. And in that sense, the problem that soldiers are facing has to do with the decisions of the government. You can be a right-wing soldier or a left-wing soldier, but you're carrying out a mission of the most right-wing, messianic, religious government
but you
we've
can't
had
be an
in our
effective
history.
soldier if you look at your comrade just down the line and you know that his political views might lead him to say he won't do certain things because it's against his moral principles.
No,
armies don't work like that.
No, you're right. You're right. But I think more importantly, democracies don't work in a way where they control other people by force for so many years.
Democracies generally get governments voted by a majority of the people. You have to live with the fact that your government in Israel includes within it people like Senior Minister Avigdor Lieberman, who has said of you and your group Breaking the Silence, they are no different from, and he quoted Ehud Adiv or Mordechai Vanunu, some of the most famous traitors in Israel's history. How do you feel about senior government ministers labeling you a traitor?
I think it's absurd, especially when you look at the military record of Avigdor Lieberman per se. But I have to say that I always ask myself a question. What was the moment I became a traitor? Was it the moment I was standing in a house in Nablus and I had a question pop into my head if I was doing the right thing? Was it on my way back to the base when I was reading a book and saying, wow, this is actually questioning what I'm doing right now? Or was it the discussion that I had as a soldier with my family? This moment when former soldiers turn into traitors is just unacceptable. Because the truth of the matter is that Breaking the Silence is not a group of people that served in the past, but there are people that are serving today that will be our testifiers. So in that sense, Avigdor Lieberman is calling his own soldiers traitors. There are soldiers who don't agree with his policies.
But only a very tiny minority are influenced by you. The vast majority are not. I think you have perhaps 1,000 voices gathered in Breaking the Silence of the many tens and tens of thousands of Israelis who over that span of time have served in the IDF. And comes to the point made by another minister, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, Zipi Hotoveli, who says a subversive organization, that is her description of you, a subversive organization based on lies which is actively trying to besmirch Israel's good name and that of the IDF.
So I would say, and this is where I think Hotoveli is the best example. I mean, Hotoveli is basically calling for a de facto one state that will become an apartheid. And Hotoveli is supporting not the state of Israel or its soldiers, but the occupation. And what we're trying to besmirch, and we are trying to besmirch something, is not Israel, but the occupation itself.
But the point is, as a citizen of Israel, you've every right to whatever political opinion you want to hold. But what the critics of your organization see is a group that actually tries to win recruits from the serving IDF and which undermines the coherence, the unity of Israel's most important institution.
You know, we just, this last week, we published a book of testimonies. I have it here. And we published an entire collection of soldiers that choose to explain why they broke their silence. For the past 2 years, there's been a smear campaign led from the highest echelons of the Israeli government, and still, soldiers choose to speak to us.
Okay, let's get real then. Let's make this personal. You have a younger brother. He, I believe, is serving in the IDF today.
That is true.
Is he a member of your organization?
No, he is not. He's a serving soldier. We can have arguments around the table, but he is not a member of Breaking the Silence.
Your brother, I don't know which unit he's in, where he's serving today, but if he's in the West Bank, he's probably doing the sort of work you did, going into innocent people's houses, setting up roadblocks. One could say doing everything that the occupation represents in terms of imposing power on the Palestinian people. Is your message to him that as a man of conscience, he shouldn't be doing that?
My message to him, and this is what I told him before he serves, is that he has a responsibility to know. My dad was a paratrooper, I was a paratrooper, and my younger brother, who you mentioned, is today a paratrooper. In that sense, the mission of Breaking the Silence is not about talking about an individual decision. It's about a governmental decision. And at the end of the day, there'll continue to be brothers, sisters, and members of the Israeli society that will continue to go and maintain this occupation unless there'll be a overall political decision in that sense.
To break the chain, you have to rely on individuals to act with their conscience. What do your brother and your father think of your stand and your message?
I'm glad and proud that they support me.
What about your cousins who live, I believe, in Jewish settlements on occupied land in the West Bank?
But like every other family, we have arguments, including relatives of mine, which I love dearly, and we disagree.
You've been called a traitor. You've been called all sorts of things. Have you received threats?
I have.
How do you cope with that?
I think that the way I cope is by looking around my fellows, men and women who are part of breaking the silence. Many of them have also been threatened. There was actually an individual who was caught with about 20 gallons of gasoline trying to burn our offices. There were people that actively tried to attack us in demonstrations. Private phone numbers of members of our family were published online. It's not easy to be a breaking the silence member in these days, but with that said, there's unbelievable support within the Israeli society. It's true, we're not in the heart of the Israeli consensus, to say the least.
No, you're not. You're a fringe. You're an extreme. And it gets down to your relationship with your own country. Your country has repeatedly voted for governments which sustain the occupation. Currently, your Prime Minister says he doesn't believe in a two-state solution negotiated with the Palestinians. At what point are you going to say, I can no longer live in this country where most of the people seem to be so far removed from my own view of what is the right, proper and just solution to the conflict with the Palestinians?
Never. I'm an Israeli patriot. I love my country, and I will fight to make it a better place. The fact is that although there's a campaign against us, led by this current administration, there are thousands of Israelis who support us, including former heads of Secret Service, including high-ranking military generals, opinion makers, artists. In that sense, we are in the middle of a struggle. We're in the struggle for the essence of the state of Israel. And I think just one more point. And I think in that sense, the fact is that the Israeli opposition and the Israeli political sphere has refrained from taking a hard line against the occupation. And that's part of the reason that organizations like Breaking the Silence have become de facto one of the only oppositions to the occupation.
In the end, you and your case are not winning the argument in Israel. I just wonder why you think that is. Why is it? Because most Israelis serve in the military. You say, oh, they're in denial, they don't want to see, they don't want to confront the reality. They know the reality. Their sons serve, they probably served themselves in the occupation. They do know the reality, but they don't agree with you.
No, but I would say this, that even though I'm a minority voice, my responsibility is to speak out. You know, breaking the silence is difficult exactly because it's against the stream, exactly because it's not easy. We knew from the get-go, we knew from the moment that each and every one of us broke their silence and spoke out, that it would not be easy to accept. But in that sense, when you look around, and when you look at the Israeli leadership today, the only path that they are leading us is to a destruction of the state of Israel. And in that sense, we might be a minority, but you cannot accept to hear voices and target them or ban them as legitimate or illegitimate because of the amount of people who support them, but because of the essence of the claim. And the essence of the claim of Breaking the Silence is that we're in a 51 year of control over people who do not want to be controlled by us. That means that our future is just more rounds of violence. And in that sense, we are actually actively fighting for there not to be a solution. Tzipi Chotuveli, who you mentioned, Avigdor Lieberman, who you mentioned, who is a settler himself, by the way, Netanyahu is actively trying to make sure there will never be Palestinian freedom. There will never be any ability for Palestinians to do exactly what my ancestors did, create a homeland for themselves.
In your heart, do you accept this is a battle you are not going to win? You can fight it, and you're determined to, but you're not going to win.
I think we'll have to wait and see.
We'll end there. Avner, Gvariahu, thank you very much for being on HARDtalk.
Thank you.